wrote down 21, and I didn't even write a check today. So we've got some new faces today and some old faces, or familiar faces, I should have said, familiar faces. So for anybody who does not have a copy of the agenda, there's ones back on the cart. We have 2 items on our agenda tonight. The first one is our swearing ceremony, or swearing in ceremony, item number 1, and then we'll get an update from our local government center, item number 2. It'll be a little shorter meeting, we hope, this evening. We might even be completed before our typical 7:30 break. That would be our goal this evening. If not, then shortly thereafter. We do have an update on the off the streets short-term shelter situation that, speaking with Chris, we thought we'd try to squeeze that in between the oath and swearing in ceremony and item number 2. And that'll be quick. It is not on our agenda, so we cannot make any decisions on that this evening. But we get a brief update and maybe a few factual questions, but we'll want to avoid lengthy dialogue on that item. Omicron is now in excess of 400,000 new cases in the United States every day, highly infectious. And so we do have a supply of masks on the back for anybody who would like one. Please feel free to grab one and use one if you would like. With that, before we go to item number 1, Chris, do we have Judge Kolar with us this evening? Hey, all right. I was looking out there and not seeing her. Anything else, Chris, before we go to item number 1? I turn it over to the judge.
As you said, we've got Carrie. We got her email about 4:30 today. I believe she's going to be here for a brief update. And no, we're ready for the judge.
Okay, well, thank you. We appreciate Judge Sheila Kolar, our municipal court judge, coming to do the swearing-in ceremony. After the ceremony is complete, we'll invite family members, friends, or the national media to take photos, whoever would like to do that. So with you, or with that, Judge Kolar, how would you like to proceed?
So I think I'm going to make it easy for you guys so you don't have to shuffle around. So everybody who's being sworn in, I just want you to stand up. I'll give you your oath, and I'm going to get help because she's going to take them to you and get them signed. So everybody raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I do solemnly swear.
I do solemnly swear.
Or affirm.
Or affirm.
That I will support.
That I will support.
Protect. And defend the Constitution of the United States.
And defend the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the State of Montana.
The Constitution of the State of Montana.
The Charter of the City of Billings.
The Charter of the City of Billings.
And that I will discharge the duties of my office.
And that I will discharge the duties of my office.
With fidelity.
With fidelity.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Welcome.
All right. Thank you very much.
So I've already signed them. Welcome all new council members. And I'm just going to say, I don't want to take your guys' time away, but if anybody wants to come see open court, I've had different council members who've done it. It's helpful to get their impressions of what we do in the city. Municipal court, that would be great. I love seeing you guys at my court. Just let me know so you're not sitting and waiting.
Everybody has to sign something equivalent.
So again, I really appreciate that you guys ran for election and won. Congratulations.
Thank you, Judge. Much appreciated. What Denise Bowman, our city clerk, is doing is handing around the written version of the oath to be signed to make it legal and binding on each of our new council members. And while she does that, I do want to extend my appreciation to each of the new council members for their willingness to serve. If in case you had second thoughts, it's too late. No, it's not a prison sentence, but it's, we do appreciate your willingness to put yourself out there, both in the campaign process, but also here for your term. It is a great privilege. With that, and we are almost done, we will then ask our off the streets. Is Carrie here? You're Carrie tonight, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. So If we're prepared to do that, we will turn it over to Chris, who's going to give us the update on the Off the Streets shelter. Thank you again, Judge. Chris Kelsey, our city administrator. Oh, I'm sorry. We never got photos. So, why don't we ask the newly oathed, if there's such a word, council members just to come in front, if we can do that, and then anybody who would like to snap a picture can get that. And we'll do this in order of awards. So, 1, 2, 3, somewhere in the middle, 4, and 5. Yeah, so. Ready. I think we're done. All right, thank you.
Oh, there goes Mike.
We don't want to see you here again, Mike.
Retired City Council Member Mike Yakowicz, thank you for being here.
Nothing else to do on Monday.
Any family members, others are welcome. Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to stay if you haven't already left, but you can leave at any time. So, all right, well, thank you very much. That concludes an item number 1. We'll move to kind of item 1.5, our off the streets update. City Administrator Kukulski.
So late this afternoon, it's in all of your inboxes. So we did receive an email from Carrie Boyder, who is the Continuum of Care Director, and she's given us an update on the situation relative to the closure of Off the Streets. Unfortunately, had some infrastructure problems. We'll just leave it at that. She provides a pretty detailed email at 4:27 this afternoon. So it's in your inboxes, just essentially giving you the outline and us the outline of what looks to be about 60 individuals that they needed to pretty immediately find shelter for. The good news is there was shelter made available, and so always at the risk of leaving somebody out, but a big thank you to Billings First Congregational Church, to the Crisis Center, and to the Montana Rescue Mission. I think between those 3 entities and the Continuum of Care work, they've been able to, with a lot of scrambling, a lot of work, make sure that people have a warm place to spend each evening. And that will continue, but it is continuing with challenges. So I did get to speak with Carrie earlier today. Her intent in being here wasn't to ask for something, it was to give you a status report and answer questions, but she did say there was a risk she was going to be tied up, and I offered that I could certainly carry the message forward. So, like I said, full email here with a good dozen bullet points, I think giving you specific data on what the situation is as of today, as we continue to work between those partners that we have. The city itself doesn't own or operate a shelter. We're completely reliant in our community on those community partners to provide those services. With that, I'd be glad to attempt to answer some questions, but I suspect some of you at the table are going to have more information than me.
Thank you, Chris, and I did get that more detailed report, so I know we did get it. Feel free to look at that. Does anybody have any questions specifically for Chris or anything they'd like him to pass on to Carrie or anybody involved with that situation? Councilmember Purington?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to express my appreciation to all of those stakeholders that help in providing shelter, whether it's just during the day or at night for the homeless. Some of those are in situations that cannot be averted, so it's good that we have a lot of community organizations out there that are taking care of those people that are in dire straits. So I appreciate it. I think we got an email that there were 70 to 80 people that were homeless, and according to, name just left me, Carrie, that there's more like 40. And those are being well taken care of. And so appreciation to all of those that are in the community serving and did God's work. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Anything else on that topic? Ed, Councilmember Gulick.
Yes. Thank you. Just, is there, so I'm afraid we didn't see the recent memo, or so is there anything in terms of the infrastructure failure that is in the cities, or is this all within the property itself?
Yeah, Chris and I had that discussion today, and we think it's only on their property, but Chris, can you comment further?
I think that is correct. I didn't get an absolute confirmation there, but I did have a conversation with Debbie Melling over the weekend, our Public Works Director, and nothing in our conversation with Carrie earlier today or in this implies that somehow there's something the city could do on our side of the infrastructure fence. I think we're talking about components of the building itself and making it inhabitable at this point, so.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? If not, we'll move on. We didn't have public comment on the swearing-in ceremony. I hope that, in case anybody wanted to kind of rebut, the wisdom of what we did, we'll just try to overlook that and hope we don't get in trouble with our procedural experts there. And we will then move to item number 2. We've got two special guests, both Dan Clark from Local Government Center at MSU Bozeman and Alan Hulse, our Montana Municipal Insurance Association Chief Executive Officer. And they have the floor here, and Dan brought with him the latest in technology called a flip chart. You might not have seen one since the 70s, but they're coming back. They're very popular and a lot more flexible than those fixed PowerPoints. So hand it over to Dan, if you can, speak into the mic and tell us a little bit about what you have in store for us this evening.
Well, thank you, Mayor Cole, and welcome on behalf of the Montana State University Local Government Center. For those of you that were just sworn in, congratulations, and we're here to help you in whatever way we can to be successful in your new position. And for those of you that have been a little more seasoned on the council, again, thank you for your service. We appreciate the work that you do on behalf of the community of Billings. So for those of you that may not remember or weren't here last month, I don't remember what the day it was, but just to give you a little bit of background about who I am. I'm the director of the Local Government Center at Montana State University. My name's Dan Clark. I've been there for about 15 or so years, and our mission at the center is to provide research, technical assistance, and training to local governments around the state. So we work closely with councils like yours, with mayors, with staff, county commissioners, other elected officials throughout the state, special districts. So we cover the entire state, working with cities and counties and special districts. And so it keeps us very busy. This time right now, after the election, on the way here, I must have gotten 5 calls all about the swearing in process. How do we do this? And so there's a lot of other city councils around the state, like Billings is having their first meeting of the year, and they're doing their swearing in of their new council members. So welcome. So what we're going to talk about. So I just want to briefly, for those that attended last month, we talked about open meeting laws, citizen participation, kind of process around engagement in both as a council and with the citizens. I want to ask before I get rolling on to the topics for today, is there anything that you want to cover or talk about or clarify from our discussion last month that you've been mulling over and thought, well, boy, if I get a chance to ask that fella again, this is what I want to ask him. So I want to just check in with you to make sure you're all okay with where we're at from our last session.
I know this is kind of an unusual situation just because of the timing, but I thought if you could just touch on the districting process that the city is going to have to go through, that would be useful this year.
Great. That's a good question out of the blue. But no, that's, I'll have to harken back to my last time I read this, which was probably about 10 years ago. But after every decennial or the census every 10 years, the law asks those that have districts, right? So the cities and the counties, they need to go through and they need to either affirm the districts or redraw the districts to make sure they're properly proportioned by population. And so I'd imagine right now you've got staff that are looking at, as the city grows over the last 10 years, it may create some imbalance in some of those districts. And so thinking about how to draw those lines. And so I'm sure that'll be on your plate coming up is how that process is ratified when it comes to you, when it, here's what we have. And hopefully that doesn't put anyone's seat in jeopardy, as you may be drawn out of that. And I don't recall, someone that may be more versed on it, but you won't lose your seat immediately. It'd be at the next election. You'd be able to retain your seat until the next election. If that's the case, then you'd have to compete in the new ward that you're in, if I recall.
In one of the steps we're, as working with Wyeth in the planning office, who's got some experience with this with Billings, because he was here for the last census, we do anticipate sometime, hopefully by no later than mid-2022, some firm numbers from out of the census. And that really sets the baseline then for that process. So we'll be able to update the council as to, okay, what happened 10 years ago? What does the statute tell us about what we need to do? Maybe I'm underestimating it. I'm not anticipating that there's just this huge shift. I suspect there will be some, but Billings, at least from 30,000 feet, has grown, but it's not grown by 5%. It hasn't grown by 20,000, 30,000 people. So I don't think we're looking at huge shifts in what we've got, but there probably will be some that this body ultimately will need to follow the statutory requirements on setting those boundaries for the future. So that's something your staff, myself, city attorney, and the planning office would bring to the council here in 2022 as we get that data from the Census Bureau to guide us.
Thank you very much. Anything else that we want to ask Dan to touch on as he goes forward? Don't see anything, so back to Dan.
Mayor, is it okay if I pass
Please,
some
please.
material out?
I didn't ask Dan for permission to say this. I hope it doesn't spoil where he's at, but he does have, when I met Dan, he was a mayor of a city here in Montana. He's got some of his own elected official credentials himself, and Dan's been working in this space for, said, what, about 15 years for the local urban center, but you were in local government for some time before that, which has always, to me, been helpful as we've, learned and grown over the past several decades as to how to continue to get better at this.
Yeah, 2000 is when I was elected, took office in 2001. So it's been, wow, I hadn't thought about that. It's been a while. So I've been doing this for a while. Yeah, and so I do know what it's like I know what it feels like to be on that side of the dais and to be, I just remember reading the paper in our little town as they're talking about the water system and all that. And at the time I was thinking, oh, this is so simple. Why don't they just, X, Y, Z? It just seems duh. and then you get on the, as the mayor, and you're on the other side of that seat, you realize, oh, it's a lot more complex than I thought, just sitting in the cheap seats being critical of the city government. And so that really turned, in my mind, and appreciated what it's like to be where you're at, doing and making the difficult decisions and balancing the growing demand and diminishing resources. So I've given you some handouts here. What I want to cover first, and I'll start with, I want to just touch a little bit on the charter, the city charter, and where that fits and what authority and why Billings is different than most other municipalities. Billings is one of about 43 municipalities out of 127 in the state that possess self-governing powers, and one of about 34 municipalities that possess a charter that goes along with that, those self-governing powers. And so I want to give you some context about what that is, what that means, because as you move forward as a council and as you work with staff in trying to address the challenges that faces your community, and as you try to create this vision, where are we headed? Because in every respect, you folks have your hands on the levers of where the community of Billings is going and how it's going to get there. And so trying to balance all that is going to be really important. And I think the document we want to focus on, because it defines initially those roles and responsibilities and the powers of your municipality that you are responsible for. So I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to, had I known, this is the first time I've been in your chambers. Had I known it was set up like this, I would have come with a PowerPoint. I don't like PowerPoint, and so I usually defer to because I can't draw pictures on the fly with a PowerPoint. So let me do this. So power, form, and plan. If you understand these three things, what powers does the municipality have, what's the form of government, and what's the plan of government? So I'm going to just briefly talk about these three things. And as you think about the voter review process that happens every 10 years, it was coming up in 2024 to 2026. The voters of the city are going to vote yes or no, should we do a study commission? Should we study our current form of government and make any changes? When that happens, and if the voters say, yes, we do want to study our form of government, do a voter review process of the city of Billings, what they're going to look at is what is our current form or power of government, what's our current form of government, and what's the plan of government, and are there things that we would like to see changed about any one of those three things. And as they go through and study and evaluate your current existing power, form, and plan, they may decide, oh, here's a thing we can make, here's something we can make better or more efficient, more effective, more meaningful, and they might propose in a final document back to the voters saying, would you like to make these changes? So the voters are the ones that are going to decide to do the voter review, and they're going to be the ones that decide what changes are going to happen. So maybe I'll slide this over. Is that okay with you, Alan, if I just walk you off? Because I want to talk through the microphone and write. Two types of power. General governing powers and self-governing powers. General governing powers, so these are the two options. So one of the things the voter review or as a municipality, you can at any point say, hey, we want to ask the voters to make a change. There's something about what's going on in our power, form, or plan that we would like to see a change. And you can always ask the voters to make that change. Something in your charter you're not happy with, or the voters aren't happy with, or the community's not happy with, it's holding you back. Well, we can ask the voters to make a change. One of these things is the general governing powers or self-governing powers. So if you had general governing powers, it means you can only exercise those powers that are expressly defined in the law or the Constitution. So if it doesn't say in the Montana Code Annotated that you have a certain or particular power, the assumption is that you do not. Self-governing powers is you can exercise any power that's not prohibited by the law or the Constitution. So if it doesn't expressly say, thou shalt not do this, the assumption is that you can. Self-governing powers is the power that the city of Billings possesses. So if it doesn't say that you can't do it in the code, the assumption is that you can. All right, so in your handout, in your little packet, I don't know which, where's my glasses? On the, so on the right-hand pocket, the second document on the right-hand pocket looks like this. It says at the top, Nature of Self-Government in Montana, Constitution of Montana, Article 11, Local Government. So this comes from the Constitution. So our Constitution, previous to our 1972 Constitution, there was no self-governing powers. This is one of the reasons, one of many reasons, that drove the state to have a constitutional convention in the 70s, was this issue here that municipalities were really struggling to be able to respond and react to the growing needs of our metropolitan areas, or cities and towns. And they didn't have that power. They had to rely upon the legislature to make or change or adopt different things on their behalf. So this was frustrating to them. And so this is what kind of drove places like Billings and Helena, Missoula and Kalispell and Bozeman to say, hey, give us some self-governing powers. In fact, it was brought up to the legislature several times, and it came up to the losing by 1 or 2 votes each time it was brought up in the legislature to grant self-governing powers. So it was then adopted in our Constitution. So what I just want to point out here is you can see the legislature shall provide procedures for permitting a local government unit or combination of units to frame, adopt, amend, revise, abandon a self-government charter with approval of a majority of the voting on the question. Part I put there in blue, shall not require the approval of the charter by a legislative body. So the voters are the ones that make this decision. You don't have to ask permission from the legislature. This is something you have the power and authority to do, your voters to do. I also just want to highlight for you all the case notes. So the next, what is it, 2 pages? 3 pages? There's a lot of pages here. Here it is, 1.5 pages, but you see all the yellow highlighted? This is where the city of Billings was one of the first to adopt self-governing powers and charter in the state. So you are the ones that were leading the way. You're plowing new ground. You're establishing, well, what does this mean? We're going to try this. And then somebody pushes back. A voter, an employee, a business pushes back and saying, I don't think you have that kind of power. And it goes all the way to the Montana Supreme Court where they determine, yes, you do, or no, you don't. And so you can see all those yellow highlighted areas in the next several pages are all issues that the city of Billings established and brought clarity to all the rest of us in the state. Where are those boundaries? So it's before there was somewhat ambiguous sideboards with this idea of self-governing powers. And through application of that power, the alleged, we think we have this power, therefore we're going to act in this way, and until someone tells us we can't. And so the court was usually either saying, yeah, you have that power, or no, you don't have that power. And you folks were the ones that were plowing that ground for the rest of the state. So thank you for that. I'm sure it was a lot of treasure on your behalf, making that investment, going through the court's process and determining what is within that realm of self-governing powers and not. So I'm sharing that with you so you can kind of look through. And there's a little bit of a history here that you can think about. And some of you are probably around and remember these court cases where the city tried something and was pushed back by the, or validated and said, yes, you do have that power. And on page, I should have put a page number, on the second page, there's a section there where it says, section 6 of the Constitution says the self-governed power, a local government unit adopting a self-government charter may exercise any power not prohibited by the Constitution, law, or charter. And that charter, yeah, that's what I wanted. So if it's not prohibited by the law, then the assumption is that you can exercise that power. Now, there is a long list, and it's growing every time the legislature meets, of powers denied. So if you would turn with me quickly, this is all building up to a very exciting conclusion here, I'm sure. Do I have it here? where it says municipalities, so it's on that right-hand pocket, with the blue, bolded blue, it says Part 41 municipalities. Oh, this is, well, I printed this one, it's not the one I highlighted, so you're welcome. But if you turn to the bottom of page 1, it talks about powers. What are the powers of a municipality? And there's a long list. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not the one, but yeah. There's a long list of powers that you do have. So you can exercise this long list of powers that's in 7-1-41-24. This defines the powers of a municipality. And so what likely happens when you see, oh, we have the power, if you look down to, say, number 21, it says impound animals and other private property creating a nuisance or obstructing a street or highway. So you have the power, we'll just go with impound animals. So my guess is you're not running around the community finding any at-large animal and gathering it up and doing something with it, right? You're not operating just because, hey, it says in 7-1-40 or 21, whatever it says, 41-21 that we can do this. What you've likely done is you've sat down and said, okay, we have this power. How do we exercise this power? So you're going to create an ordinance. You're going to create a local law that says we're going to exercise this particular power that we have, and it's going to be exercised in this way. We're going to collect animals that are large. We're going to house them in a secure and safe environment for so many days, allowing an owner to come and claim that animal. And if not, after that time, it's going to be adopted or whatever is going to happen to it. And you're going to have policies surrounding the dealing with and management of these at-large animals. That's how you exercise the power that you have as a municipality through ordinances and resolutions and policy. So as you were looking through this long list of 24 different powers that you have, likely you have associated with that a long list of ordinances that define and clarify what that power is. It's not unlike our Constitution. That's not a very big document here, right? In this little pamphlet, it's, I don't know, not even, it's like 70 pages. 71 pages long is our Constitution on a pamphlet like this. But it goes from this is just Title 7 through 14 of the Montana Code Annotated. This is where the legislature says, okay, now, like you, this document gives us power as a state, now we're going to operationalize it in the law. So you have, your charter is like your Constitution, you're going to operationalize it with your ordinances and policy. This making sense so far? All right, now, let's turn to the page that I forgot to get to earlier. So that on the left-hand packet, there is a document that says, at the top, it has those, the constitutional sections 5 and 6, and then it has the nature of self-government. And I want to turn your attention to page 2, 7-1-111. So 7-1-111, if I jump back now to what I mentioned earlier about the powers denied. So we just talked about the powers you do have, plus, right? Because that's what the legislature says, you have these powers. For a general governing powers municipality has those powers enumerated in 7-1-21-24, whatever it was, 24-21, as I mentioned earlier, 41-24. This is the list of powers you do not have. So self-governing powers, you can do that list we mentioned earlier, any additional things that aren't on the list that we have here under 7-1-111. These are the powers denied. So you're prohibited from exercising the following powers. You can't affect a private or civil relationship. You can't mess with the school system. You can't determine a rate otherwise determined by a state agency. You can't tell DEQ, no, we're not going to pay your fines or fees. We're going to do our own thing because we're self-governing. The state's taken that power away from you to be able to lock horns with the DEQ. You can't pass ordinances that deal with the right to keep or bear arms. There's a long list here. And I'll just mention that since 2017, we've added number 20 through 25. The legislature has added those additional powers denied. And you can maybe imagine what municipality they were geared towards. So right now, one that just came up at this last legislative session is that you can't regulate plastic grocery sacks. You can't regulate fees or taxation or penalties based on carbon or carbon use. So they're taking some of those powers away from you. So if you were contemplating doing those things as a municipality, saying, look, it's not denying us this power, it's not necessarily expressly granted to us, but we have self-governing powers. So if we want to get in the realm of regulating carbon use in the city of Billings, until this last legislative session, you could have. Now you can't. Does that make sense? So this is the list of things that you cannot do. Yeah.
Dan,
Yes.
can you, in having these, and they're relatively new, can cities challenge those if they wanted to? I mean, it would go through the court and all of that, but can they challenge those?
You could. I don't think you'd have much success. Because I think this is reserved for the legislature to make these decisions, what powers you can and cannot have. And I think that's founded in the Constitution. So I don't know if it'd be worth the effort, the expense of trying to challenge some of these. So as you're contemplating and as you're thinking about what is our vision of the city of Billings, what are the tools you have to realize that vision? What are the resources you have, and what's your lane relative to your whole community? We just had a discussion earlier today about the warming center. That is not a service offered by the city, right? It's a service offered by the community, by the nonprofits, maybe some business contributions, right? There's a lot that goes into what creates and makes the city of Billings. Think of it as a big pie. The city government is a slice of that pie. So you play a role in creating this overall pie, but you're not the pie. There are many other pieces and parts and components that make up the community of Billings. So recognizing that, so how do we partner? How do we facilitate, in many ways, this good work that helps us reach this vision of what we'd like to see our community be in the next 10, 15, or 20 years? And what is our role relative to that vision? Recognizing that it may not all be our responsibility. But by creating that vision, it's going to allow an alignment not only of city and city resources and public resources towards that vision, but it also creates predictability for the rest of the community to engage and align their energy and efforts and resources to helping create that vision. And it's not necessarily created by the 11 of you, but it's going to be created by how do you facilitate this discussion with the broader community through the committee and boards that you have, this broader conversation about what does it look like to be, for the city of Billings to have this livability, and what does livability look like for Billings, and how do we articulate that in some sort of a plan or document that provides direction for the staff to implement that, and you're providing that overall view and direction that allows all these other resources and efforts to take place. All right, I'll come back to that. So we've gotten through our powers, right? So we recognize that the city of Billings has these self-governing powers. You can do anything that's not prohibited, exercise any power that's not prohibited. So you've seen in that one section in 714123 that talks about the powers that are granted to general governing powers or municipalities, which you have those powers in addition to an expansive list of untold power that's not on that prohibited list. Form. So now the form that you've selected in your charter is the commission, manager, or council manager form of government. So the council or commission form of government is where you have an elected city commission that then hires, based on knowledge, skill, and experience, a manager. That is your sole employee that you work with and coordinate the operations of the overall of the city. So that's the council manager form. Think of it similar to a school board and a superintendent of school. School board has one employee, it's the superintendent. The last thing any of us would want to see is a school board member in a classroom trying to evaluate a teacher. Why not? Shaking your head. It doesn't work, does it? It's not their role. It's not their expertise. That's why you hire a superintendent that has lots of experience, lots of knowledge, degrees that go along with understanding how to run and function a functioning a school district, how to manage those teachers, how to help implement the curriculum, right? The board is not involved in that operational part. That's why you hire that superintendent of schools and the board that looks at budget, facilities, curriculum, and allow the operations of that school district to take place through the direction of the school superintendent. So it's a very similar model that we have with the city of Billings. So that's the form of government you have. And what I'll say is this is done with a charter. That's the form, but that form is defined in your charter. Now, a charter is only an option for a municipality if they have self-governing powers. If you don't have self-governing powers, if you only have general governing powers, you can't have a charter, right? So whatever is 127 minus 34, whatever math, yeah. So those municipalities don't have charters, they aren't able to have charters. So they only use the MCA to guide themselves. For you, in the plan of government, that's what the details in your charter is your plan. That's an A-R-T-E-R. All right, so I'm gonna flip this sheet here. So I was going to draw a picture, now I don't remember what I was going to draw. Right,
Probably a picture of a very strong mayor, since that's the other option.
So, let's look at your charter. So if you, it's one of the last handout in your left-hand packet. Oh, that's what I was going to do. So, 1972. In 1972, we adopted the Constitution. And in that Constitution, as we read, there are sections in there that deals with local government, and we've expanded the powers of local governments, providing them an opportunity or an option of having a charter and having self-governing powers, which Billings was one of the first out of the gate to adopt that. In that first voter review that went from 1974 to 76, the voters decided to adopt a charter. And it was implemented then in 1977. Need another one of those?
Just didn't want to slow.
Oh, yes, it would. Guy's always concerned about liability. That's good. Your workers' comp claim for me there, yeah. So your charter would be akin, for the city of Billings, this is like the state's constitution. The charter is similar to your constitution for the city that defines the powers, the structure, the organization, and terms of office, how to replace vacancy. All of that is defined in your charter. So that is the document that you're going to look to help guide your operations. This is where instead of referring always to the Montana Code Annotated, you first go to your charter. What does it say in our charter? Then you'll look at now, the MCA is still relevant to you. The MCA, if your charter is expansive, you have these powers, but if you haven't adopted an ordinance defining the power that you want to exercise, you with me? If you don't say this is what we want to do, the default then is the Montana Code Annotated. So there's still guidance. It's not like the Wild West out there. There's still guidance. The MCA still has relevancy to you. So that's going to be your guidance, right? Unless you create or adopt something different by an ordinance or a resolution that say, we're going to go this direction, regardless of where the MCA is taking us. So that's where you're going to want to be looking at, what does the MCA say? What does your ordinances say? What resolutions have you adopted? And what policies? So that's that next line. As you think about, you say, look, the Constitution is going to give us some guidance. Our charter is going to give us more guidance specific to us. And then what have we done over the last, well, since 1977, that you've created a whole body of ordinances and resolutions and policies that provide guidance and direction for you. And then under that, it's going to be a bunch of plans, right? Capital improvement plan, your growth policy, all these are plans that you've been creating that's going to provide some guidance for you and the staff. These plans in their aggregate really define the vision you have for the city of Billings. And this is the plans which your staff, the staff are operating from every day. They're moving the needle every day and trying to address the plans that have been adopted by the council. Is that making sense to you? And so this is that kind of altitude that the commission hangs out at. Is thinking about how, I don't know how many plans, off the top of your head, do you know how many plans you've operating from at this point?
Got to be several dozen. I mean, if you literally look across 12 departments, take facility planning alone in the water system, you got, a water, soon to be 2 water plants worth over $100 million, in what we've got today, and then a whole 500 miles of pipes in the ground and lift stations and a variety of things. So you've got plans around implementing those, and then those help guide rate structures or rates or the financial need of which the council then often adopts, a set of plans for, okay, how are we going to pay for, who's going to pay for these investments?
Yeah. The council didn't wake up one day and say, hey, let's build another sewer plant. Right? I think that's a good idea. Or a constituent called me and said, hey, we need another sewer plant, so I'm bringing it to all y'all. Let's move on this, right? That is likely not the case, I'm hoping. I'm hoping that there has been a master plan that the city has been looking at as you're looking at your infrastructure and your needs and your growth and where do you want to site different things. And you get to a critical point where you say, okay, it's time to pull the trigger. And you've been thinking about all along the line. How are we going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for it? Where is it going to go? This is something that is really coming from this group. And it may not necessarily be coming from you specifically where you're trying to figure out as a group of 11 folks trying to figure out where are we going to put that. But that you say, this is the direction we're headed. This is our plan. And now you have the staff that are out there trying to figure out the details.
I think, Dan, it is a good illustration of the reality of if you didn't have the policy body support or vision or recognition that, the $2 billion of infrastructure that the citizens own needs to be properly taken care of. I mean, this is not uncommon, right? It wouldn't be uncommon, just to kind of point out some extremes, that elected bodies, especially in the 70s and 80s, really bragged that they were not raising utility rates. We have raised utility rates in 12 years. Wow, don't you feel good about yourself? Now, what's the condition of the pipes under the ground that started being put in the ground in the 1910s? So, in my career, I've really, frankly, enjoyed, beyond the first couple of years, elected bodies that had a vision to see the necessity to properly invest in infrastructure, and staff professionals helping to guide, okay, when are we going to need that second water plant in Billings, Montana? And it really takes both. If you didn't have the political policy engagement and support, the staff couldn't get stuff done. And I'd argue the council's going to struggle if it had to do it all by itself and it didn't have professionals guiding and advising as to how to, meet the needs of the community or anticipate the needs of the community.
Yeah. I think of city councils like that old commercial from BASF, We don't make the paint, we make it brighter. We don't make the music, we make it clearer, whatever. That's kind of your role, is we're not creating a thriving Billings, right? Well, maybe I'm gonna screw this up. The work that you do is making this a brighter place, right? You're doing that stuff behind the scenes that allows the prosperity, the economic engine of this community. You're not creating jobs, so to speak, but you're creating the environment where jobs can be created. That's really what I see the biggest role in economic development relative to a municipality, is providing a well-thought-out, well-planned place where outside investment says they got their crap together. This is a place that I can bring my organization, my business, my whatever. I can make an investment because I understand the rules, I understand where we're going, and I can see where my investment's going to have a long-term payout. If you're like a wagging tail of a dog, they're going to see, boy, that's very unpredictable. Every 2 years, we're getting a new council, and they're blending things up. And the predictability for me to make an investment in this municipality is pretty unclear. Maybe I'll look somewhere else where I know that my investment will be protected. I can see the future and see where it's headed. And now I can bring my company or whatever that investment, or I can add on or expand my organization rather than making a satellite somewhere else where it's going to be more predictable and more business, when they talk business friendly. So I often see you guys, you folks are the ones that are merely making that economic development engine, right? You're not creating the jobs, you're not creating the businesses, but you're making a place where they can thrive and survive. With me so far? All right. Couple thoughts I had here. So look at on page 2 of this document here. I know you got a pile of them that are all different colors in front of you, but this one here that has the Constitution at the top and it says nature, self-government. Look on page 2 at the top there, 71105. That's where I was mentioning earlier about state law applicable until superseded. All state statutes shall be applicable to self-government local units until superseded by ordinance or resolution in a manner provided in chapter 5. So that's really the basis. Is what I'm trying to do is paint the picture for you to get a sense of, okay, what's our lane? What's our decision-making space? How do we operate? What are the resources? Now, you've got great legal counsel that's going to be very helpful in helping you navigate this. And so oftentimes you're brainstorming ideas, coming up with plans, initiating plans, all while you have this guidance to make sure that you're staying inside your decision-making space. We've got a long history where Billings has been establishing what that decision-making space is through the court system, right? And I bet there's a whole raft of AG opinions also coming out of Billings asking the AG, saying, hey, we don't understand what to do here. We don't necessarily want to go to court. Help bring some clarity to this. All right. Any questions from you so far? Thoughts or questions, concerns about what I'm saying, or?
Dan, I'll just give you one since you haven't asked us to hold all the questions till the end. You're specifically asking for them.
Yeah.
In the list of prohibited powers, the very first one that has a significant history is even cities with self-governing powers are prohibited from, quote, any power that applies to or affects any private or civil relationship. That's a big category. Typically, it's interpreted, I think, as meaning fundamental private relationships like marriage. We can't define what a marriage is. That's the role of the state government. Civil relationships, even defining contract, establishing basic rules for contract. Again, it's state rule. But then there's an exception. Except as incident to the exercise of an independent self-government power. An independent self-government power. So I guess what the legislature is saying is if it has specifically granted us as a self-governing power a specific permission to drive in that lane, then it's okay? Is that what an independent self-government power is, if you know?
Yeah, what you've described sounds reasonable to me. I haven't thought about that, and I think that sounds where they provide that space for you. Say, here's a spot where you can play around in, but outside of that, it's our domain.
Okay.
And
Right.
usually this, sorry.
No, yeah.
Usually the state government says, look, well, I'm trying to be good. This is on TV. Usually the state legislature says, look, we will make those rules and laws that are applicable across the board, that have statewide relevance. We're going to preempt local governments from acting if it has statewide relevance. Now, so as you look at, the vaping and some of those other things that they've added over the last couple of 5 years at the legislature, so here's an example of leadership coming from a municipality. The city, I don't know if I talked about this last time, the city of Helena and their Board of Health and the city council recognized that there was secondhand smoke had a health concern for their citizens. And so they decided to create an ordinance, self-governing power, created an ordinance, exercised the power, wasn't prohibited from them to do this, to have a clean air ordinance inside bars and casinos. And who do you think howled when that went into effect? So they drug him to court saying, you don't have that power. And the courts came back and said, well, yes, they do. They can exercise that power. It's not prohibited, and it's within the scope of the municipality, health and safety and welfare of their citizens. And so it stood. So what happens next? Billings, well, I don't know if you guys, I'm assuming Billings did, Bozeman did, Kalispell, Missoula, they all followed suit. Then what's the next thing happens? The legislature realized, oh, there's a statewide need here. The momentum and the leadership is coming from the municipality, drove the state legislature to create a Montana Clean Air Act. And it came from and started in the municipalities. So as you look at some of these things, I see that leadership coming from the municipalities. And the state could choose to either say, hey, let's take a look at this and how do we make this a better place for everybody, or how do we take that power away? And in some cases they've leaned into it and have embraced it. Some cases they've said, no, we don't want you going down this path. I saw the vaping as a similar example when I think it was Missoula that was looking at creating an ordinance to outlaw or something. And anyway, and so this legislature stepped in and said, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to take that power away. Now, the state legislature could have done that around clean air. They could have created a prohibition, a power denied, but they chose not to. Instead, they went the other direction. So it's just an interesting way to think about how that play is, that you can provide that leadership for the state as a municipality. The other things I want to point out on this page, while we still have it open on page 4, powers requiring delegation. So there are certain powers that you have to have delegation from the legislature to do or exercise. So the power to regulate private activity beyond the geographic limits, power to impose a duty on another unit of local government. Yeah. So those are just in the mandatory provisions, things that you have to do. So that's just a few things I thought I'd pull out to help you see that balance of power that you have. There's a long list, 21 different things that you have power to act or operate in that's given to any municipality. And then you have this general idea of, as I'll say here, legislative power, 7-1-4123, first page, page 1 of this handout here. It says, the municipality has legislative, executive, judicial powers. Is that the one? Nope, it's 23. It says, municipalities with general powers has the legislative power, subject to the provisions of law, to preserve the peace and order and secure freedom of dangerous and noxious activities, secure and promote general public health and welfare, and provide any service, perform any function authorized by law. Now for you, that number 3 doesn't apply, but it gives you a framework by which, where is our space? Health, safety, and welfare. How do we make this town brighter, right? What's our vision? How do we use that authority and power given to us by the state and by the people of the city of Billings to create the vision? Where are we going? How do we resource that vision? How do we empower our staff and our citizenry to help us accomplish that outcome? Now, all that to say, let's look at our Billings charter. How are we doing on time? Where's my clock?
It's 6:30, so you were going to move on to your roles and responsibilities of the mayor, council, and administration.
Yes.
So.
Whew. So I had times with that agenda, huh? Keep me on track. All right. So that's kind of a primer that we just went through, give you the big picture. Now we're going to drill down to specific to the city of Billings. Hopefully you've had a chance to read this. Now, all of this, I don't know what theirs looks like.
Yep, they have the same one.
Does this look familiar? So this is like the first section is this, your charter. So I love this. This is lovely. I'm taking parts out of this and adding it to my presentation. So your charter, adopted in 1977, powers of the city, again, where you're asserting that we have self-governing powers, right? This is who we are, this is how we're going to operate. And then you have this curious section 1.02, I'm sure everybody loves this section, where you placed, and here's my guess, I don't know much of the history on this, but here's my guess, is that first study commission, as they're contemplating what the charter might look like, and as they're working with the public to try to figure out what this charter, and there's no history that you're operating on, no one else is, you're plowing new ground, you're the tip of the spear, so to speak. So you're trying this on. So I don't fault that at all, that first study commission that created this charter, as they likely negotiated with the public. Right, the public was probably coming to meetings saying, hey, we don't like the idea of the that might give them too much power, they might get drunk with this power, they might do all sorts of heady things that might put us at peril. And I would guess that's why they put in this mill levy. It was probably a negotiated agreement with the public, the voters, to say, hey, if we put this cap or a limitation to their ability, would you go for it then? And that's probably when they said, yeah, we'll do that. So now, how many years from 77, who's good with math? Right? 45 years later, you still have it, right? And so we have a lot more experience around charters. We have a lot more experience around how cities have operated with them. And so there's no other charter that I'm aware in the state that has this type of a provision in it. And so this is a discussion we can have, the merits of this and many other things within your charter later on. But I think this was a first blush, first try, let's put this together. But it might be time for you, after 45 years of trying this thing on, and as we've evolved both in society and as a community, maybe there's some things we might want to look at that can make this better.
And Dan, if I could just
Go right
say,
ahead.
without getting fully on a soapbox here, just the definition of a mill levy. What a mill is worth, what its tax percentage is taxed on, I bet has been changed 30 times.
Yeah.
Since 1977. So even as simple as if you were to say, oh, you know what, the mill levy cap's a good, sound political idea, recognize it in and of itself is being affected by the legislative body that gets together every few years and determines what percentage are we going to tax on. So it is more complex than just simply, oh, good, we thought of this cap number, we're going to put it here. We're infected by both.
Yeah, and it may have had some sense given the context and the environment in which they made that decision in 1977. But I would say after 2001, the big bill that came through that redefined all of this, the mill levies, and as a response to I-105 from back in the late 80s, as you're probably like, this is not working so well for us. So that's an official local government term. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so really that'd be something well worth looking at. Not to say it needs to be thrown out. Maybe the public really likes it. I don't know, but we can talk about that at a future meeting. So we got that whole section, talks about boundaries, the legislative branch, and then it goes through, again, it talks about this is the powers of the legislative branch, all the powers vested in the legislative branch shall provide for the exercise thereof and its performance and duties and obligations imposed by city law. So again, it's a trigger for you saying, look, if we want to exercise a power, we need to create an ordinance saying this is the power we're going to exercise, this is how we're going to exercise it, whatever potential due process that might be part of that. So you've got to be thoughtful about that. You just don't say, oh, we're going to start doing stuff. It's got to be judicious in the way you approach that. Can I use that word, judicious? I did. Composition, so this is where it defines your terms, your wards, the term limits, all of this is grounded in your founding document here. Again, no other, that I'm aware of, no other city or county has placed term limits in their charter. I think, again, you are the only city. That might be a good thing and it might be a bad thing, depending on who you are. Some of you might say, whew, I'm sure glad we got term limits, and others like, oh darn, we've got term limits. So again, that's an option that you can explore whether that's still working for you. And again, this is that conversation you can have with the community about, is this working for us, having term limits or not? Deputy mayor, all those responsibilities that go with the mayor. One of the things I want to point out here, and this is what's interesting, is the mayor will, like boards, I believe it says on here, boards are appointed by the mayor with the consent of the commission. Right? So there's that relationship where you've got to negotiate on several things. Appointments, when there's a vacancy, again, I think it's appointed by the mayor with the consent of the commission. Council, sorry, the council. So 3.08, the council and its members and the mayor shall deal with the city officers and employees who are subject to the direction and supervision of the city administrator solely through the city administrator. Neither council, its members, nor the mayor shall give orders to the city officers or employees either publicly or privately. So why is it, and I'll just say, if you were to look at the state statute that deals with the council manager form of government, the general governing powers that they have defined in the MCA, has the same intent in this separation of powers, and that you are operating in your interaction with the operations of the organization solely through the manager. Why is it that they create that expectation, both in the law and in your charter? That's the question. You can feel free to.
Well, I guess the obvious answer is we only have one employee, and those are not our employees.
They're not your employees. You've got 1,000 employees-ish, 1,000-ish. It's a lot of employees. And so does it help to have 12 bosses? One official and then 11 well-meaning, interested folks. And so part of this discussion too is trying to figure out what's your altitude relative to the operation of the city, and then what's your role at that altitude, right? And there is a power that comes with the position that you have. You have tremendous power. And then there's areas that you may think you have power that you don't. But you may be operating, because it's intoxicating and appealing to get into that realm where you really don't have power, but by virtue of your position, people will respond. Right? You call up the garbage crew guy, and you talk to the garbage crew guy, introducing yourself, I'm the city council member from such and such ward, and I have a question for you. They're going to step up, they are going to give you all deference, and they will try to respond to you. Should they? They should be polite, but they should also say, look, you really need to talk to the manager. Talk to the manager. They shouldn't be saying pound sand, but maybe that's what the intent is. You have no power here, but you're using your position in a way that you ask anybody on the staff, like you call anyone, and they're going to jump to it. They're going to leave whatever they're working on, and they're going to focus on what you're asking them. Right? And if you can imagine, you've got 11 different people drilling into all different aspects of this organization that's trying to manage a tremendous amount of stuff. It could really gum up the works pretty quick. So part of this and part of the intent here is that you're at that policy. I mean, it's the same as if a school board member's calling us, the teacher saying, hey, what's the homework assignment? And why are you doing that? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, that's not your role. So try to get up and find that role. You have positional power, then you have the real authority. And I think there's enough in that real authority that you can use that has a big impact in the community. So looking down again, the executive. So I just wanted to point out there was that 308, and was there another one here? And 307 and 308, is that 307?
There's a prohibition
Yeah.
of appointments on those. Interference.
Yep. So those are pretty key, I think, in trying to figure out what is your lane as a city council, what's our lane? And as I mentioned in this document here, in this flow, there is a lot that goes on in this area that you're providing that framework and this soft infrastructure, if you will, organizational infrastructure that allows the efficient and effective action or execution of plans and vision, right? So you're looking up here at the vision side, providing the leadership for the city, and you're throwing things to the city administration saying, here, we'd like you to do this. All the while monitoring and making sure that it's meeting the expectations that you might have for the outcome. Some of that, the expectations aren't being met. We were intending this, but we're getting that. Now, it could be the way it's being administered, and it could be the way it was written. Oftentimes, you're creating something that's never been done before. And so you're going to try it out. We're going to create this ordinance, and we're going to expect and anticipate this kind of an outcome. But oftentimes you get unintended consequences that we realize, oh, that's not exactly what we thought. There's nothing wrong with going back and revisiting that policy, or that ordinance, or that resolution, saying, let's tighten it up a little bit. Let's get us where we want to go. And it may not necessarily be on the execution side. It's just, look, we've got a pretty broad, defined role we're playing here, and we're going to go curb to curb. If you want it tighter, we've got to go back and revisit the enabling legislation that created this duty, expectation, or service. Does that make sense? So back and forth, I think, is going to be really important there. So let me... Now, you've seen this before. We talked about this last time, is the interlocking circle of the legislative and executive branches, right? The executive branch being the administration. They're administering, executing, the legislative branch being all y'all. I love saying that, all y'all. Anyway, so what in the middle here is where those two circles overlap is where there's this team that's taking place, right? Where you're working together, the administration and the governing body, trying to figure out how do we create the vision, how do we execute that vision, what is it going to look like? And so we have a clarity about our direction, and then we each play a role in meeting that obligation. So this is where you're going to have retreats or goal setting, and I think in your packet, you have in like section 3, you have this whole section on goals and priorities. What are the priorities? Now, you have a defined set of priorities from that packet. We just had a bunch of people just got sworn in. So it would be helpful. And I'm not saying, hey, just get along and go along, but look at those priorities. And that might not be a bad idea to have a discussion amongst the group saying, are we still grounded in these priorities? Because I'll tell you, the administration, until told otherwise, that's what they're doing. Each department, each division of the city is working from that set of priorities and goals that have been established by the council. But we also recognize things change. The economy shifts, growth, a pandemic. There's all sorts of things that might shift and change those priorities. So I think there's a level of vigilance that needs to be on your part as you're looking at what are these plans, what are our goals, what are our priorities, how do we resource these priorities? So there should be a direct connection between the priorities that you've established in your document with what? I was going to give the answer away, but I'm going to ask you, what should there be a correlation between, here are our goals, should be matched with what? Your budget, right? So what's important to us? I love it having these conversations where I get to talk to a lot of elected officials, and they often will talk about, these are the things we really find important and valuable. That's great. But I will tell you what you find valuable and important by looking at your budget. Doesn't matter what you say, it's what are you resourcing. And so you tie your resources to what's important to you, because that's what's going to enable the staff, the administration, to implement those things that you prioritize. So if it's not being resourced in your budget, then it's not a priority for you. Now, that budget's likely going to be, well, it is, as it says in here, it's generated by the administration. It's brought to you to say, here, we've had this discussion before the budget process about our priorities. We've sat down with our staff and administration. We figured out what it's going to take to deliver on these priorities, create the budget, we bring it back to you. We say, here's our list of priorities, here's our budget. Now, is this appropriately allocated? And this is where you come in and say, no, we need more here or less there. So then you can kind of shuffle the deck a little bit more to make sure it meets what your intentions are and your expectations relative to implementing the plan. So the budget is your big plan. You also have a capital improvement plan. You have a growth policy plan. You've got a Parks and Rec plan. You've got all these different plans that are being generated, evaluated, updated by probably a whole host of boards that exist out there. And they're working and laboring along with the citizens in each of those little unique silos, trying to generate what are we going to do in this particular area of city operations and create a plan and bring it up for you to review. And then you're looking at all these plans because there's going to be some overlap, right? There's going to be some overlap. And so as you start working on one, you're going to see how that's going to affect some other plan, another plan. And this is where it becomes complicated, where it's every now and again, a city will Control-Alt-Delete and say, look, we've got a lot of plans. And some of those plans are in direct competition with each other. That in order to satisfy this plan, we're going to violate this other plan. I think Black and Olive was one of those situations in Bozeman where there was one of the council discussions like, wow, one of our plans says we need to focus on infill within the city. Another plan says we need to preserve the character of our neighborhoods. So what do we do here? Because if we do the infill, we're going to have an impact on the character of the neighborhood. So, but if we if we just honor the character of the neighborhood, how are we going to satisfy the infill expectation we have? And so that's not something that the administration is going to wrestle with. The administration is going to bring that to you and say, hey, we have two competing philosophies in our plans. How do we reconcile this? How do we overcome this?
Dan?
Yeah.
Question. So, since I've been on council for 2 years now, we've had these priority setting sessions. And of course, they've revolved around public safety and then we've got to prioritize within there. And you made a comment, and I thought, and I know I've said this before, that staff has certain priorities because they know what needs to be fixed or whatever. And council doesn't. And so you have these new council members coming on. I was there before, and they're saying, what are your priorities? And you're going, you know, how highfalutin do you want to get with your priorities, my priorities, what I think, you know, I wanted to do coming on council. But then when you realize, well, staff has stuff that I think that we don't really look at what the staff priorities are versus where we need to go as a council. And that's why I keep saying we need to see what staff priorities are. And I guess that's what the CIP kind of brings to us, of where some of those things are going. So I'm not sure how to meld both of those priorities setting sessions.
Oh, it's messy.
I know.
It's terribly messy, and this is why it's glacier speed, and you'll never be done, right? You'll never say, finally, we've made it. No, so you've described it very well, and thank you for bringing that up, because I was going to do this little thing. You know, surrounding this are the constituents, right? And you also have out here, you have all the citizens, and you have your multitude of boards and commissions and committees and all those groups out there doing this heavy lifting on your behalf. You're often saying, hey, Parks Board, here's something we want you to work on. Create a master plan, or do this, do that. Here, Tree Board, here, whatever other board we've got, here, do this work for us. Being clear in what you're expecting them to do, and then, get that back and then put that into your mix. So part of that is going to be coming from, and the assumption is that those boards are going to be engaging the citizens and those people that are very interested in that particular area. So some of that input that you're referring to as you're making these priorities and goals is going to come from your boards and from citizens that are going to be feeding into the legislative process. They're contacting their elected representatives saying, hey, you're on the council. Here, what about this? What about that? So you're getting all that input and feedback from general citizens as well as these citizen boards. The executive branch, right, all these department heads and departments are also out there in the trenches working on these things. And so they're figuring out, ooh, it's pretty important if we were to take advantage of this opportunity or zig when we need to zag, whatever. So part of this process is you're getting input and feedback from the executive branch through reports or, here's something you need to consider. And then you're getting it from citizens, you're getting it from boards, and there's this relationship back and forth between the executive legislative branches. So you're going to come up with this idea, might be informed from the public, and then you're going to say, hey, staff, here's an idea, and provide a framework for them. Can you come up with something that's going to have these things, expectations met in it, in some sort of a policy, framework, ordinance or whatever? And they will take your input, craft something and bring it back to you. You debate it. The public weighs in and their public comment, and there might be some changes. You kick it back to the executive branch, say, hey, tweak these things. They tweak those things, bring it back to you. So there's give and take from policy creation, policy development, refining policy, ordinances, generic small p policies. So it's laborious, it's time consuming, it's kind of squishy. It's just another technical term, squishy. But as you try to figure out how to make those plans and policies.
Hey, Dan, could I ask for the local government center to give some consideration to a area that it might want to help with the next 2 years? We're coming up on our mandatory 10-year charter review process. We know just from internal conversations, we've got a lot of housekeeping changes that I suspect we'd want to make. I don't think the public would have any problem with it, but a document of this age needs, if nothing else, clarification and cleaning. Combined with that, though, there are probably some fundamental questions, be they about form, be they about the mill levy cap that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation. Those are two very different animals. I can envision a process where we put all the housekeeping changes into one bucket where we don't expect a lot of controversy and where we frankly would not want to jeopardize passage of those because the voters didn't want other things that are more fundamental and policy issues. We're going to need some guidance, I think, and I don't think we'll be alone throughout the state about the procedure, start talking, comparing different charters, comparing charter language. Maybe we can cooperate with other cities, start working together on the procedure and also the substance of these charter review. It's a big process, and the pattern has been here is it becomes overwhelming and we just kind of say, let's do that 10 years later, and I don't think that's good. We've pushed this can down the road too far, in my opinion. But I throw that out to you. I'm just speaking for myself, but I suspect we could use coordinating with your organization and also other cities.
Oh, we're on it.
Oh,
yeah. Great. No, yeah, that's, we're gearing up for that right now. We have several books and resources, and we're trying to impanel a group right now of administrators, elected officials, and city attorneys to craft a model, or at least look at existing charters and their language, and how do we take this language that we've been trying on, and how do we, and then now we're experiencing it. With our experience now over the last 40 some odd years, what would we want to say now? How would we want to write that now for clarity? Yeah, so we're working on that, and that's one of the reasons why the Local Government Center was created, was because of this photo review, which, by the way, is unique to the state of Montana. There's no other state that has what we have. And I think part of it was because our Constitution adopted, the original was adopted in 1889. And it took us until 1972 to say, it's not working for us much anymore. And our Constitution in 1889 was cobbled together from, what's the state for Philadelphia?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, thank you. East of the Mississippi, there be dragons. So, so Pennsylvania and Illinois, both of those constitutions were adopted by were accepted by the federal government. And so we were a railroad state, those were railroad states, so they took big chunks of their constitution, cobbled together into some sort of a coherent document for Montana, just for the purpose of, we want to make sure the feds say, yes, you can be a state. And they had to adopt that constitution. And it wasn't, so now we're using that document clear up into the 70s. So I say all that in that that's one of the reasons why they baked into our constitution that we have this periodic review, not only of local government, but the state. Every 20 years, we are asked the question across the state, do we want to have another constitutional convention? Because we know that over time, this might get too ripe, and it's time for us to take another look at that Constitution. And so the last one was, I think, in this last decade, and it failed. We decided, no, we don't want to do another one. Question.
Thank you. You said that there's several cities that have charters. What's the attitude of the cities that have charters? Are they happy with charter itself, or are they talking about maybe going the other way?
Back. By and large, most of the municipalities, and there's city counties, so the Butte, Silver Bow, and Anaconda Deer Lodge, and then Fergus County are counties that have self-governing powers and charters. But on the side of municipalities, they're pretty well happy with them. They like to have that expansive flexibility that comes with self-governing powers. I will say that the city of Lewistown at this last voter review placed on the ballot the question to go back to take away, or to go back to a commission or council mayor form of government away from the manager form. Lost by, I think, 1 vote. Long story, local politics. They thought, well, if we got rid of that manager, then the mayor would be far more responsive, because there's a group of subdivision got annexed into the city that they didn't want to be. So once they become part of the city, they rallied the troops and tried to reverse that. So I think, yeah, but I will say that a lot of them are saying, yeah, we'd like to tweak this, we'd like to tweak that. And what we want to do is kind of get all that input and experience from these various charters that all have a little bit of uniqueness baked into them, and then say, what would we, if we were to create a model charter, and there may be a better charter for more of the urban areas, and then one for maybe the rural areas. The needs and complexities are a little bit different. And so I think we'll probably set something like that. So when these study commissions do sit down, they have something that's, right now, the model charter we're using, there's some language in it I would like to see updated, just from our experience. Go ahead.
So an interesting component for you, so Dan's been talking about this constitutional component. We in our process have initiatives that the council has a process for. So if you actually look at the priorities list, there will be added to that list a handful of initiatives. We kind of went on a bit of a spree at the end of the last council at adopting some initiatives. That's not a criticism or a compliment, but those are priorities. One of those was to not wait until the study review process. It was to say, you know what, we want to be a little bit more proactive and start looking at this sooner rather than waiting for that process to happen. And actually, I think that's a wise decision, but you will at some time in 2022 need to make decisions. Are we going to move forward with that initiative and make that happen, or are we going to not? Next time you see Dan, at least that's what the schedule intends, is he's coming back. I think we pushed it to March. It really has nothing to do with orientation. It is getting into the process of understanding you taking the proactive approach, or the community in making changes or reviewing the charter, or waiting until the standard process. So
Yeah.
there's more to come in that discussion, and you'll see that initiative on the list of priorities as something you've instructed me and our staff to follow through on. So.
And to your point, Mayor, there may be, in that discussion to weigh out, maybe the council-initiated review could be the housekeeping stuff, and then reserve for the voter review process the more potentially controversial issues from your charter. So that could be a way to approach that and get something on the ballot, or flip it and say, look, let's do the hard stuff on our terms, and we define, so you're not placing in the hands of an elected group of people that you may or may not see the same thing that you see. So part of it is do you want to manage the process, having the outcomes that you would like to see, having sat in the seat or sitting in the seat, versus citizens that might get elected with a variety of interests in that process.
Okay, thank you, Dan. It's 7. I don't know if you had more. You're right on the nose at this point before, or where would you like to go?
So how much time do I have? Is my time over?
Well, it's up to, we got all night. We'll be here till midnight, right?
It's a negotiation.
So there's one more document I want to review, and then I'll kick the time over to Alan. So that the last document, I was going to draw something here. Let me draw something, and then it comes from this document here. So this is the page 20 from this document that you have. I love this document. It's very concise. It's a single page. It really defines this relationship between the elected legislative body and the appointed manager and staff. And I apologize. I'm like, when I get the old highlight wand on my computer, it's like, oh, that's good. Oh, this is good. This is good. And pretty soon everything is highlighted and nothing's relevant anymore. But so this again takes what's said in the charter and likely through other policies that have been adopted by the commission or the council over the years, and kind of describes it here. So the policy guidance, so I'm looking at the second sentence of that second paragraph. Policy guidance is set in an ordinance, resolution, plans, budget, and ultimately by the holding of the city administrator accountable for achieving the task of implementing those policies. That's the relationship that you have with the city administrator, is you're establishing these policies and establishing, here are our expectations. And then you're hoping that the manager and the administrative staff and the rest of the city staff are going to be meeting those expectations. And so it's important that you're clear on what are our expectations. Likewise, it's important for the staff and the administration to understand what are their expectations. So by defining expectations, getting them written down is going to be very helpful for you to start figuring out what is our lane, what is our role, making sure that you're not overstepping your bounds and getting into the muck of the administration, the execution of things, but you're maintaining that level, that appropriate altitude that comes with that role that you're in. It is important that the governing body members recognize their policy leadership role. Establishing clear and consistent policies allows for staff to effectively apply knowledge, creativity, and resources to accomplish desired council outcomes for the community. And I really like that word creativity in there. Creativity to me, the only way you're going to get creativity is when there's a high level of trust. If there's not a high level of trust between this body and the staff, you're not going to get creativity. You're going to get mundane, checking boxes, but if you really want to get the best out of the staff and to really get that discretionary effort from the 1,000 members of your organization and the engagement of your citizens, and get those creative juices flowing to solve these complex problems that you're facing, there's got to be a high level of trust. So how you build that trust? partly is understanding and what is your role and responsibility as a council, and how do you hold accountable the administrative staff to execute those policies that you're creating, that vision that you've created. So there's a really strong leadership role here that the council plays, and that's that paragraph down below, but I want to just read the next paragraph here. Is the council should focus primarily on desired ends or results of what, and provide broad guidance on the means and the how for the administration. So the next paragraph, leadership requires envisioning the community's best possible future, communicating that vision, and ensuring that there are adequate resources to accomplish the actions that will create the vision. So tied in there is you've got to have a vision, where are we going, how are we going to get there, and how do we make sure we appropriately resource it? Which comes back to the prioritization of your budget, which also comes back to this broader discussion about your charter and the limitations that places on you that aren't experienced by other municipalities. The mayor and the city council have one employee, the city administrator, providing clear desire or direction and speaking as one body is critical. So whether this commission passes a resolution, an ordinance, some sort of a directive, a plan, 5 to 6 or 6 to 5 or 11 to 0, it doesn't matter. It's going to be implemented the same by the administration. So like it or not, when you make a decision, whatever that decision is, that is the decision of the municipality. This is the direction we're headed in. And so running out onto the steps of the city hall with the reporters and yelling and screaming saying, yeah, but I didn't vote for it, is not very helpful, because it's going to be implemented the same whether you did or you didn't. So when the vote is made, democratic process has been fulfilled. We have the majority rules, but the minority has had the ability to engage and weigh in on that and hopefully define it in a more clear and better way. But at the end of the day, it is the decision made of the body. So it's important that we all get on board with those decisions. And finally, it is critical that the mayor and the council remain focused on their leadership responsibility as the policy body and remain in compliance with the city charter. So I really like this document, and I hope that you refer back to it and really helping you be clear about that leadership role, empowering the legislative branch to do, or the executive branch to do their part. And there was something else in here. I was going to draw a picture. Here's one of the things I like. I've already used blue. Let's go with orange.
So as Dan's drawing, I know some of you, very candidly, this handbook, I didn't write. We tweaked it a fair amount this time around. 2 years ago, I think we just took what was off the shelf. I'd been here for months and used it. And we didn't refer to it very much. I did not refer to it very much over the past few years, but my intent this time around has been, frankly, to be much more deliberate about, here's all this stuff in the handbook. Let's actually use this. Not that it's perfect by any stretch, but that it really is, I think, does do an excellent job of providing some decent guidelines and dialogue for us to continue to work with. So for those who are wondering, hey, what do the new ones have? It's very similar to what was handed out 2 years ago with some enhancements to it, but I would say, candidly, probably 2% of it changed from before. But the intent, and we've been using it more as we get into orientation beyond this week as a foundation. And again, not because it's perfect, but I think it's a decent foundation.
So, Dan, while you're finishing your picture, I'm just going to provide a small amount of gentle pushback, I guess, or clarification, I guess I would call it. This is the lawyer part of me coming out. I read this and I think, absolutely, it makes, it's the way to run a railroad, or Ford Motor Company for its board, or the city council for Billings or Bozeman or Missoula or any place else. As soon as the governing body starts dictating day-to-day operations, shall we say, you create all sorts of inefficiencies, morale problems, a long list of difficulties. But this is where I say, however, although I think that's good policy, let's be clear, and feel free to disagree with me, I don't see a legal basis where this is required to be the case? If there is, tell me what it is. If the city council really wants to care about the color of the walls in City Hall, which would be silly, but could do it, I don't think that we're prohibited from going there. Would you disagree? Again, it probably doesn't make sense. There's a lot of risk to do that, but it's a fuzzy line from day to day. And sometimes one man's policy is another man's, nitpicking day-to-day operations. So that's my only point, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to either agree or disagree or clarify. Mike Boyette, Councilmember Boyette.
It would be like, what's the penalty if I say no? I'm going to go talk to the chief of police every day that I want to. What he's saying is, what is the law that says I can't do that? There's no penalty or punishment.
Yeah, so what does your charter say? Do you have any policies or ordinances that define such? I don't know what that layer is.
Yeah, and by charter, we obviously would be specifically prohibited from giving directions, orders to staff. Those things are black and white, crystal clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and so if you're looking at, so two things. If you say, look, I want to get down on the weeds in this thing, on this issue, you've got issues going on with parks, I would imagine, right? Something going on with the parks, right? So getting down on the weeds, yeah, I think inefficient. And I would guess, unless you have something in this realm here that's on the books that defines more clearly what your charter says, there's probably nothing that defines, that would hold you back from doing that, from getting down on the weeds.
What I would add, Dan, is it is gray.
Yeah.
And that line can be pushed back and forth, and it really depends on the relationship between administration and the elected officials. And leaving names out of it, not too long ago, a mayor had to resign or felt the necessity to resign, and it was really over this area of getting way too deep in the weeds, and this person's peers saying, in the community saying, whoa, you're way overstepped your bound. Was there anything outright illegal there? Probably not. But ultimately it got to that point where you guys as peers, we as working relationship, there's a balance here of minimizing the necessity to draw a line in the sand and maximizing the opportunities for us to collaborate and do things in an effective way. Sometimes, yes, absolutely. In fact, the same statements have been made. I've worked with elected officials for 25 years. One elected official could make the exact same statement as another elected official, but it was viewed as a directive, and damn well you better follow this directive, and would be probably arguably able to prove that is fully what you meant. Whereas another elected official could make that exact same statement and probably ride the line of, that was not my intent. We were having a conversation. So the intent in none of this is to say, here's the sharp line, don't cross it. Our effectiveness on both sides really is benefited from each other working in our spaces to the best of our ability.
Dan, you put a lot of work into your drawing.
Oh, yeah.
And so I want to give you a chance to wrap up with that. And traditionally, we try to take a break around 7:30, but we were going to try to give Alan 30 minutes. And if we take a break, it could be a little inefficient. It might be good to, if he thinks he would really keep it at half an hour, we would just go a little past that and then wrap up our meeting. But are you ready to conclude with your drawing?
I'll put a final thing with your comment, Mayor, or question, is there likely, nor likely should there be a law or policy defining that line. There is an important aspect of governing is what we call norms. And they're not static, and they can evolve over time. So part of that is what are the norms, and the other part of this discussion is that level of trust, right? And so when you get too far in the weeds, not only is it disruptive as you describe, but also it sends a chilling message throughout the organization that we don't trust you. And so you've got to think about it. So once you start getting down that path, there is a cost to that. There's nothing to say we're going to take your birthday away, we're going to send you to jail, all that. There's no, and there, like I said, there likely shouldn't be, but just also recognize how do we build trust in an organization? And part of that is empowering people. And when you get too deep into how we want to dictate how things are going to be, then that really demonstrates to both the staff and the public through the process is that we don't trust you, that we, 11 of us here, are the smartest people in town. And so maybe you are. But really it's those norms and how do we empower people, how do we trust you? And like, what do you care how many sprinkler heads we have out in the park? This is your altitude. Let someone else figure out that, or the type of tree anyway. So to move on to my picture here, one of the things you want to think about, and hopefully this is what's happening, and I just want to put a picture to it because this was my, the clouds parted, is that when that give and take in the legislative process, right, as you're being informed, it may be coming from the staff saying, here we've had this committee, and I'm the liaison with the committee, we've been working on this for a long time, here's a report, here's all this information. They're giving you context. This is what is this big picture of what's going on. This is all the moving parts out there. Here are some options. We could do this option, this option, this option, or this option. This is our staff recommendation, right? From our, looking at the plan, looking at the trajectory, looking at the discussions we've been having over the last 10 years, although many of you have come and gone, this is the momentum that we have as an organization. Here's our preferred alternative, but it still comes up to you. You have all the information, you have alternatives here. Here is what we would recommend. And then the staff sits back and said, now, this is your role. What do you think? You may jettison their preferred alternative, say we like option number 4. Nothing wrong with that, right? But you have the information necessary to make those decisions. That's part of the reason why we have adopted the elected representative form of governance that we have, is because we want people like you to deliberate, to hear all voices, to look at all the alternatives, to work through the information you have and try to make the best decision for the most people for the longest period of time. Does that make sense? So there's my picture.
Yeah.
Despite my poor spelling, I was writing as someone made some comments, ooh, that was good, and I...
It's lovely, but if it's a table, that's going to be a bad set of legs.
Yeah.
That thing is going to be pretty...
this is not the growth range. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan.
Excuse me, Mayor. I'd like to go ahead and ask for a break.
Council, we can do that, and that'll give Alan plenty of time. I don't want to break mid Alan, so let's just take a short 5-minute break. It is 7:17. We'll try to come back no later than 7:25 and a little earlier if we can, and then we'll get about a half an hour, and don't anticipate anything after that, so we should be done by 8 o'clock.
Done us two favors.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If everybody can take a seat, we will get started. Again, thank you, everybody. I hope you had a lovely break, and also your Christmas was nice, as well as your 5-minute potty break. Alan Hulse, I apologize. I first referred to MMIA as something like the Montana Municipal Insurance Association, which really
It's never happened.
wasn't close. So a good place to start would be to tell us who you are and what MMIA really is. And here I should also recognize our own Kevin Iflin, who is on your board and is our local MMIA representative and authority when we have all questions MMIA. So Alan, it's yours.
Mayor, thank you. Members of the council, thank you. And I will try to be brief. Am I on? There. Thank you. Try to be mindful of your time. Yes, Mayor, you did refer to us as the Montana Municipal Insurance Association. We used to be the Montana Municipal Insurance Authority years ago. We changed our name in 2009, and the purpose behind the name change was really to get to what I'm going to talk about tonight, which is we're not an insurance company. A lot of people think we act like an insurance company, look like an insurance company. Some people even think we smell like an insurance company, but we are different, and I'm going to talk about the ways and why we are different. You're right, Mayor. Kevin is on the MMI Board of Directors, and I believe he's a vice chair now, currently. We've had a lot of changeover in the board, so I'm even having trouble keeping track of who's who. But yeah, Kevin is our vice chair. The MMIA is a risk retention pool. We are owned by you guys, by you and the other 125 cities and towns of Montana that participate in our programs. And we actually run 4 separate risk pools. We run a workers' compensation pool, a liability pool, a property pool, and a health pool. The city of Billings participates in 2 of those 4 pools. You participate in our liability program and our work comp program. You self-insure for health, and you purchase property insurance commercially, I believe. So I'll focus really on the 2 that you participate in tonight. But really to understand how we function and why, I think it's important to kind of take a little bit of a history lesson. The MMI was formed in 1986. And in 1986, there was a commercial insurance crisis going on in this country and really worldwide. And it was due to capacity issues. There wasn't enough money coming into the commercial marketplace. Insurers were losing money. They were not charging enough for the products they were selling. So underwriters were charged by insurance executives to clean up their books of business. And unfortunately, local governments in the mid-'80s were not considered ideal customers. And so many cities and towns, counties, school districts, not only in Montana, but nationally, were either finding themselves in a position where they couldn't get or purchase liability insurance coverage, or if they could get the coverage, the cost was prohibitive. Costs would go up 100%, and we're not going to insure your police department or your fire department because they're just too risky, okay? And I would profess to all of you, as elected officials of the city of Billings, you cannot run the city of Billings without insurance. You just can't, not in this day and age, not 20 years ago, or 36 years ago. So city officials across this state did what you all do best. They got together, they collaborated, and they came up with a strategy to group self-insure. And they formed the MMIA. They started with a workers' compensation program, followed shortly thereafter by a liability program. That was in January and April of '86. And then in 1998, those 2 programs were working so well, we decided to start a property program. And then in 2001, we started our health insurance program. So that's kind of who we are. We are different from an insurance company, even though we collect money from you. We invest that money, as limited as we are in how we can invest it. We follow the same investment restrictions as you all do, so we don't get a lot of return on the money we invest compared to a commercial insurance carrier. But then we use that money to administer the programs and to pay claims. How we're different, though, is you all have a seat at the table. You all have a mouthpiece, eyes and ears that come to Helena 5 times a year and gets to make decisions, just like you all make big decisions on rates, how we're going to charge, what kind of coverages we're going to provide, what kind of services we're going to provide, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's up to myself and my staff of 32 people in Helena to execute those broad goals and policies that your board of directors sets. So because of that, because we're owned by all of you, we operate in a world of transparency, which is not real common in the commercial insurance world. You can our meetings are open meetings just like yours are. Any one of you could come, sit, participate, comment. We take great strides to try to make sure you all understand how you're priced, why you're priced the way you are, why coverage works the way it does. We do put a lot of emphasis and resource into training and educating our membership. A lot of our time goes into risk management. Because the more we can do to help you manage the risk of running the city of Billings, the less we have to collect from you and everybody else collectively to pay for those exposures. So we do an awful lot of training and education with the local government center, with the Montana League of Cities and Towns. We do individualized training. We will come to Billings if they want a safety training in your water department or your sewer department, or you want a liability training for your police department. We will come and do those trainings free of charge. We don't, it's not free. I mean, we collect the money to administer the programs, but we don't charge in addition for that. We also do broader events, hosted events, where coming up in March of this year, we will have an executive forum. Where we bring mayors and city managers together collectively, whoever wants to attend, and we do a 3-day or 2-day, spans 3 days, it's 2 days total, training on roles and responsibilities, running local governments, open meeting laws, advocacy. The league will come and talk about what's going on at the legislature. We will usually do a 1 to 2 hour or 3 hour time slot on employment practices liability, or how to run your sewer department without getting sued, or those types of fun things. We do a city attorney. We actually do 2 city attorney CLEs each year. We put one on ourselves, and it's in conjunction with the Clerks and Elected Officials Institute that the local government center puts on in May of each year. We have in conjunction with that, a separate 2-day CLE for city attorneys where we focus on nothing but municipal liability issues. And then we do one in the fall of each year in conjunction with the League of Cities and Towns Conference. And so that's an opportunity for your city attorneys to come get usually between 10 and 12 continuing legal education credits at no cost to them. We don't charge for the credits. Their only cost is the travel and expense to attend. Trent, we will be doing, hopefully, we've not done them in a couple years because of the pandemic, but the local government center, the MMIA, and the league usually will host 10 to 12 we call them municipal summits around the state, and it's kind of a traveling road show, and we just get out and we invite whoever wants to attend, whether they're staff, elected officials, whoever, and we will pick topics each year. And usually with us, it's where are we seeing claims, where are we seeing developments, and that's what we want to talk to our folks about. And then Dan and his crew will do training on, again, roles and responsibilities, open meeting laws, public records, those types of things, and then the league will be there doing their thing as well. We work very closely with the Montana League of Cities and Towns, with the local government center, even with the Montana Association of Counties, trying to get the resources to you that you need. We aren't experts necessarily in governance issues, and they're not experts in civil liability issues, but we all talk to the same people. And so we've gotten put together a pretty strong strategic partnership between the organizations that works pretty well. And then I want to touch on a couple of other things that we are doing right now. Just so you know, we started about a year and a half ago, and the pandemic has kind of not let it develop the way we would have liked, but we've invested money in an online child abuse prevention program. That program is really it's a toolbox for your operations, parks departments, swimming pools, police departments with resource officers, libraries, any of your departments that interact regularly with the youth of your community. It's a toolbox for them to look at policies, to look at checks and balances, and to really measure themselves on what they're doing proactively to prevent child abuse situations from occurring. And that's something that is relatively new for us. And like I say, we rolled it out right before the pandemic hit, so we really haven't had a chance to see how it will develop, but I think it's going to be a pretty dynamic program. When I first saw that program presented, I was at a national conference, and I remember sitting in the room listening to these people talking about multi-million-dollar liability settlements and up to $1 billion liability settlement in one state. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, but that doesn't happen in Montana. And at the same time, I started thinking through claims that we'd had, and I'm like, yeah, that can happen in Montana, and hopefully not on my watch, and hopefully not on your watch. So everything we can do to protect really what's the most valuable resource of our communities, our youth, I'm all for it. We also have resources and e-learning training programs on cybersecurity. That's a big issue right now, as most, if not all of you know. Those are huge issues. We have a safety skills program where it's a toolkit for safety trainings, tailgate trainings, videos, those types of things. And then just really, we try to act as a resource. I was in a meeting this morning before I left Helena relating to a contract issue that was sent to us by your staff, an issue they're trying to work out. They wanted our input relative to coverages, those types of things. So we do a lot of that type of consulting, just not telling you what to do or not to do, but here's how your coverage works. Here's some things you want to consider. You might want to transfer risk in this situation or not in that situation, et cetera. We have always taken the approach, it's you guys' job, between you and your administration, to run your city. We're not going to come in and tell you, if you don't do this, we're not going to cover you. But we do want to provide that information, that decision-making framework, so that you make informed decisions. And when I teach risk management, I tell people, look, there's no way to avoid risk in running a municipal operation. You just can't do it. I mean, the only thing that comes close would be to kick everybody out of Billings and build a big fence around it, right? And even that's not foolproof, because somebody would try to climb the fence, fall off, and probably file a lawsuit. So what we talk about is managing risk and making informed decisions. And sometimes, and I've been around long enough to know this, sometimes you look at a decision and say, yeah, I know that might cost us, but we got to make it anyway. And that happens. And we just want, when you make those decisions, that you see the potential consequences of those actions. So that's kind of who we are and what we do. I work for a board of directors, kind of like Chris works for all of you, and we're similar in how we are set up. We have a CEO. We don't have a charter, but we have a set of policies and procedures. We have a linkage policy between my position and my board of directors. They speak to me. I work for them. Staff works for me. It's not that they can't speak to my staff. They do all the time. But there is a line set forth in policy as far as directing staff, tasking staff, those types of things. Those responsibilities fall to me, and I think that's important. It's important for staff. It's only fair to staff to know who their boss is. And I would say, as far as you guys, and you're sitting in your chairs, by and large, we don't get a lot of claims, lawsuits filed against city commissions or city councils or city commissioners or city councilors, mayors. When it happens, it's usually blurring those lines. It's usually crossing those lines. That's normally where those claims arise. And again, I'm not sitting here saying the sky's falling. I'm not sitting here saying you can't talk to people. I'm just saying be mindful. When Dan talks about roles and responsibilities, that's important. It really is. And from an ability to defend you, it's really important. And the one thing I would say relative to staffing is you have to consider what the other side's perception is. We're defending a lawsuit right now, and I will say, and kind of to your question, Mayor, in my mind, there were no lines that were really crossed. It's that fuzzy gray area, but we had two city council people who, in staff's eyes, were harassing them. They were asking questions, asking for records, asking for what's going on here, what's going on there. But it got to the point, at least in staff's mind, and I'm not saying who's right or wrong, and we're defending this, so we'll see what the court decides or what a jury decides. But in staff's mind, it got to the point where it became harassing. And in this instance, the city clerk quit, as did the finance officer, and then they turned around and filed not constructive discharge, harassment claims against the city and the individual council people. And I think we have good defenses, but again, it's something we have to deal with. And I think what tends to happen is it's your approach. It's how you talk to people. And if people perceive that approach to be collaborative and just asking for information as opposed to directive, I think it goes fine. But you just never know how people are going to respond. So if there was one caution I would give you, just keep those lines, to the extent there are lines, in mind as you're doing your jobs. I wanted to comment on one other thing, just because when your city administrator mentioned it earlier, it struck a chord with me, and he talked about you all have the power, the ability, the authority to really have a big impact on your community. And he talked about infrastructure and $2 billion worth of infrastructure. And it's your decision on whether you're going to put money into maintaining that infrastructure or not. And from our perspective, we always encourage you to put as much money as you can into maintaining that infrastructure, because quite honestly, that's where our claims come from. Sewer backups, water main breaks, sidewalks, trip and falls, potholes in your streets. When that infrastructure starts to deteriorate and collapse, that's when we get claims. Most of them aren't huge claims, but they can be. And I hearken back to my days as an adjuster, and in my early years, Butte Silverbow, the water system, since its inception, was owned by the Anaconda Company. And the Anaconda Company, for 100 years, charged a $5 flat rate. Now, that's a great deal if you're a ratepayer in Butte, right? Yeah. You could water your lawn for 6 hours a day, and you're going to pay $5 that month, okay? The problem is they weren't collecting enough money to maintain that system. And so when I started adjusting claims in the mid-90s, Butte Silverbow took over the water system. And it was a mess. I would spend 4 days a week just doing water main break claims. I mean, because the mains were so decrepit and old that they would break. We had cars falling through the streets. We had houses being flooded on a regular, reoccurring basis. And they put together a 25-year, I think, master plan. And they're just now getting their system turned around. So it's those types of decisions that you all make today that could cause problems way down the road for future people sitting in your chair. So I would just encourage you to keep those things in mind. With that, I told the mayor I wouldn't be a full half hour, and I won't be unless you have questions, and I'm certainly willing to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Alan. I'm sure we do, but thanks for clarifying that scene from the movie Evel Knievel, where the car falls through the dirt road, wasn't I always assumed it was a mine down there, and it was really one of your sewer mains or water mains.
I would just say about the 6th or 7th year after Butte took over the water system, if you could imagine this, they had 2 full-time 3-person crews doing nothing but leak repair all summer long. That's 6 people. That's all they did 8 hours a day. It's leak repair. And they weren't gaining any headway on the problem. So after 6 years, they decided to put on a third 3-man crew. And at the beginning of that summer, they had 34 active leaks when they started the third crew. At the end of the summer, they had 42 active leaks. So, I mean, and I was convinced that the more they fixed, the more pipe they replaced. It was such a leaky system, the more pressure it put on the old decrepit pipes, and it was just causing headaches.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Questions for Alan? Councilmember Denise?
Thank you, Mayor. And without discussing any cases or anything, we typically, we'll go into executive session in here. This is MMIA case or not MMIA. What specifically is causing these not to be covered by you?
Sure. Like I said, we act a lot like an insurance company, and similar to an insurance company, we have a policy or a coverage document, okay? That is not an ISO, not a commercial policy. It's one we've crafted. We've changed it over the years. We've added coverages where they've needed to be added. But that is the primary controlling document on whether there's coverage on a claim or not. And so there are, we start with a broad form. We're going to cover you. We're going to cover you up to, in the liability program, $750,000 per claim, $1.5 million per occurrence. We're going to cover all of your staff. We're going to cover elected officials. We're going to cover volunteers. So we define who we're going to cover. As long as you're all acting within the course and scope of your employment and not breaking any laws. So that would be one exclusion that comes up later on. If you commit an intentional willful violation of the law, or you cause intentional harm to somebody, that could trigger an exclusion under the memorandum. Other exclusions, we have an exclusion for certain activities or events that we have over the years deemed to be too risky to want to insure. Things like air shows, fireworks displays, those types of things, okay? Those are more specialty type of insurance, and we don't have the capacity to do that. Things like wage and hour disputes. If you fail to pay somebody what they're legally owed, right, minimum wage or overtime when they're owed overtime, and you get called on that, we're not going to cover you for that. So we would go through with each claim, we would look at the facts, if it's a lawsuit, we're going to look at what's pled in that complaint, we're going to apply the coverage document, the exclusions, conditions, et cetera, and make a coverage determination. More often than not, what happens is there are exclusions that we think may apply, but we don't have enough information or facts, or nothing's been proven at that point. So we would issue what's called a reservation of rights. We will tell you, look, we think these exclusions may apply. We're going to hire a defense attorney to defend you. If they're proven, we reserve our right to withdraw coverage, and we would proceed accordingly.
Mayor, quick follow-up then.
Go ahead.
So are there any options where the city can, for instance, a residential homeowner can buy earthquake or flood insurance or choose not to? So is there any options that you offer that the city maybe should be purchasing, or maybe even going to a third-party carrier to cover that type of coverage?
We do have some optional coverages. For the most part, our coverage form is very broad. Okay. We do offer employment practices liability coverage. For years, we didn't cover employment decisions. And really, talking to people that have been around the organization longer than I have, when that decision was made originally, it was because it was deemed by the people that sat around the table, you all, in our context, that employment decisions were political in nature and we don't want to cover them. We have since added that coverage. We will cover employment practices decisions by an endorsement. We don't charge anything additional for it, but you have to go through an underwriting process. We want to make sure you have good policies and procedures, good job descriptions, those types of things in place. And if you go through that, and we've got an employment practices specialist, they stamp it off as approved, you're covered. Skateboard parks. We don't cover skateboard parks unless you get an endorsement, and again, there's no charge to it, but we want to make sure that park is designed by a design professional and that they have professional liability insurance. So if there's an accident down the road and the accident is caused by your failure to maintain the park, that's on us. But if it's caused by an improper design issue, then we want somebody there that's responsible to pick that tab up. I'm trying to think, there's one other, we don't cover airports, okay? You guys are one of the few cities around that own the airport. So we worked a deal out with your property agent where they cover the airport. They have a coverage that covers the airport, but the problem was they wouldn't cover your people when they left the airport premises. We cover your people, but we don't cover, we had some limited premises coverage on the airport, but airport operations we didn't. So rather than you paying, because your premium base for us, our underwriting base is your payroll, right? So rather than you paying 100% of the premium based on the payroll at the airport, we said that doesn't make any sense. And you guys estimate every year about how much your people that work up there are off premises, and we issue an endorsement to cover them for that. So that fills a hole that otherwise was there, the commercial carrier wouldn't do it. So we try to get creative in situations like that. I would say if there's a coverage that you all think you need that you're not getting from us, talk to Kevin, bring it to the table. We're looking at those things every year. Are there coverages we provided, and this is something you're not going to find commercially. We started, I think, probably about 2009, 2010, you were there, but we started an optional, well, not an optional, it's a no-risk coverage for sewer backups and water main breaks. So typically, if your sewer plugs and it backs into somebody's home, which can be devastating, under Montana law, you're not automatically liable for that. Okay, the homeowner has to determine or prove that you were negligent in operating, maintaining, inspecting your sewer system. A lot of times that isn't the case. And so we would end up denying liability on your behalf, and a lot of homeowners policies, unless you buy an endorsement, don't provide that type of coverage. So it left your homeowners out in the cold. And so we decided in I think it was 09 or 10, that we would provide a no fault coverage. It's limited. It's not going to cover the whole shebang, but I think we're at $2,500 now. And I think we will talk about raising that potentially this year on a no fault basis. We don't care who's at fault. We'll pay this money to receipted damages. We still deny liability on behalf of the city, but we will pay that on a voluntary basis.
Thank you. I think I'd recognize Councilmember Boyd and then Councilmember Treaky. I'm also just going to, lest we forget, just to comment for our new council members. For the last 2 years, Billings has received an award from MMIA for its workers' comp claims history. And my recollection is that is based not on a per capita basis or per employee basis, but just in actual dollars. And even though we're the largest city with the most employees, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, Alan, but we've actually had the lowest claim history, which seems unbelievable, but apparently that's been the case for the last 2 years.
It is categorized, but you are segregated with all first-class cities. So it's you compared to your first-class neighbors, which is, again, still phenomenal.
Largest cities.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Councilmember Boyette and Councilmember Treaky.
Thank you, Alan. In the last couple of years, we've had two real issues. One was rocks falling off the rims, and the other one is a big ditch that the water rights go back to 1902. Can you just really briefly just discuss falling rocks and water?
Councilmember, I will very briefly discuss those issues because I believe we are in litigation on both of those issues. So I don't want to go into a tremendous amount of detail. And so I think the way I'll describe both of those issues in one kind of lump sum is we look at those types of situations based on what is your duty as a city. You have a duty to exercise reasonable care to maintain your property, to maintain your operations. And to the extent that duty is breached, that you fail to do what you were supposed to do or don't do something you were supposed to do, then then that could create liability. And so for every one of those claims, we will go through a pretty exhaustive analysis at the claim level, where we will do an investigation. We will work with your parks people, with your sewer and water people. We will gather records. We will look at the facts, and we will make that determination. And if, in our view, we deny liability, we don't feel the city is liable, we will deny liability on your behalf. And if ultimately you are sued as a result of that, then we will provide defense counsel and defend that case. Both of those cases, I believe, right now are going through that process. And so we'll see where it all shakes out at the end of the day. But we really try, for the most part, to really honor that. We're going to pay the claims we owe, and we're not going to pay the claims we don't think we owe. And if that means we have to defend those claims, then we will. I can't say that 100% all the time. There are some times where you have to make a business decision, and it's just too much risk and too much money to try to defend. But for the most part, that's the philosophy we operate under. You bet.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Tricky.
Yeah, I was very intrigued about you talking about like training on principles of liabilities, and I assume you do something also on like risk management too?
Yep.
Is that available? Is that like in-person type of thing yet, or is it?
Yeah, it typically is. I would come, my risk management people would come out, and we would, if you had specific issues that you wanted to talk about, we certainly could in that context, or we would just do a general overview of liability risk management, safety management, those types of principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that so much of what we do, we really have to be thinking in those terms. So it'd be really useful to have at least like the framework and stuff like that for us to work off of. Is the same true also about the child abuse prevention program?
Now that program is an online program that would be available to anyone here. We would just have to set it up to where you had codes, and it really provides again, it's a checklist and toolbox of, and not every, there's not a one size fits all in this arena, right? You have to look at your operations, what capacity you have. Glendive is going to be different in their Parks and Rec program, maybe capacity-wise, than Billings is. So it's really a way to measure what you have based on capacity, what's in place, offer some suggestions, ideas, policies, and really score yourself against the average, if you will. And what I tell people all the time is, really in that context and in that exposure area, child abuse prevention, what you're really trying to do is create as many roadblocks and hurdles as you possibly can to deflect and defray people that would be in that position to go somewhere else.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Councilmember Gillick.
Thank you, Mayor. As I think about falling rocks, it seems like people, homeowners especially, and mostly in Ward 4, but also in part of the Heights too, have a lot of exposure. They're near the rim rocks where there's a lot more risk in those areas. They also, those homeowners benefit from proximity to it. There's a wonderful place. There's a reason people like to live near them. I wonder if there's some sort of hybrid insurance policy that can be for, right now the city's in a difficult place. It doesn't make sense for the city to be taking it's maybe not fair, I guess, for the city to be taking on liability for just a particular area when that the whole city takes on. I guess I'm not explaining this right, but it seems like people who are living within that a more dangerous area ought to be paying into a joint insurance policy that covers everybody there, that distributes the risk much more, because right now it's, and then it would give the mechanism also for the city to be hiring the geologist, to be trying to look out for things before they actually happen, and trying to pay for the contractors to mitigate that work, as well as to, those risks before they fall. I don't know if there's any role that if that's just a private kind of policy that's done, but or there's some sort of hybrid or something. But it does seem like there's something that could be done there that would be in the interests of all homeowners in those high-risk areas as well as all city taxpayers.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And again, I'm going to be very, very high level on this. I mean, I guess my response to that would be, there's always something that can be done, okay? At this point, my thought would be, let's see how this works out in the courts, because there's a bunch of different issues at play here. And if, at the end of the day, there's a solution that needs to be had, then let's all sit down and talk about what that solution might look like. But at this point, I think we just need to see how this plays out, because it's a big problem.
Okay, thank you. Maybe last one, because we're at 8 o'clock, Alan. It's standard for us to require $1.5 million of insurance in our contracts with vendors. 30 plus years ago, when I was a baby lawyer, it was standard to require $1 million. I've got a umbrella policy, $5 million. I was talking to a friend the other day, his umbrella is $10 million, and yet the city, who's dealing with $100 million projects, is requiring $1.5 million of insurance. Probably doesn't matter, because the vendors that we deal with typically have a lot more than that.
Sure.
But I think a few months ago, I asked whether you had any data on historic trends of Montana verdicts, because I think they've gone up many, many times from that old days of $1 million 30 years ago. Could you just want to comment on what we should be requiring? Do we have data on those verdicts? And because I think Montana's come more in line with national standards, I suspect, in recent years.
Yeah, I would say a couple of comments, Mayor. I don't have data. I know we talked about that, and that is something I want to look at. We are starting, as we review contracts for cities, we are asking them to consider asking for higher limits from contractors, but there's a cost associated with that too, right? You know, it's going to come back into what they're going to charge you if they have to go buy a higher limited policy. I think the $1.5 million is just an easy answer, right? Because under Montana's tort caps, you as a city are capped at $1.5 million. So any public entity in Montana, the most, at least theoretically, a group of plaintiffs could get in a lawsuit would be $1.5 million. So that's all you want to offer, because if you have insurance that extends beyond that, you waive the right to those caps. So it's always been kind of that reciprocal, we'll give you $1.5 million, you give us $1.5 million. But I think you're absolutely right. I don't think Montana's pacing necessarily with the rest of the country. I think the coastal states are driving still a lot higher than we are. I talk to colleagues around the country that, you know, 15, 20, 25, $30 million verdict against a public entity in their states is not uncommon. Thus far, we have not seen any outrageous verdicts like that, but they are inching up. And by inching up, I mean multiple digits inching up. They're not just $100 here, $100 there. We're starting to see larger verdicts in this state. So we will certainly do that research. I'm kind of limited. I'm not going to get any data necessarily from, well, I shouldn't say that. I might be able to get some data for the commercial marketplace. I certainly can get data from the pooling community, which we're talking about public entities around the country. There's 456 or 58 public entity pools around the country. So that would be a good starting point, and we will get that data. And what I want to do is incorporate it into our just general risk management discussions. Start indoctrinating your public works directors, the city attorneys, et cetera, on these are the type of verdicts.
Very good. Council, anything else before we say goodbye to Alan? Councilmember Tricky?
Can I follow up to your question? So you said there's a $1.5 million liability limit according to by the state. Can you explain exactly what types of lawsuits that would be limited
Yeah,
to?
personal injury, bodily injury, and property damage. The most an individual under state law can recover against a public entity in Montana is $750,000 per claim and $1.5 million per occurrence. And the difference between a claim and an occurrence is, in a claim, it's only one person, one individual that's harmed. In an occurrence, you can have one event that harms multiple individuals. And so those are the theoretic caps. Now, they've not been tested in front of the Supreme Court in a long time. They've been in place for a long time. So whether they would withstand judicial scrutiny with the right set of circumstances, I don't know. And they don't apply to like federal claims. So if it's a federal lawsuit, tort caps won't protect you, or if it's not a state claim, you have some operation going on. Let's say you're picking up a new fire truck and driving it back, and you get in a wreck in Nebraska. Our tort caps aren't going to protect you in that instance.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Mayor and Council. Just a thank you to Dan, a thank you to Alan. There's no question in my mind, directly, our relationship with the MMI has saved us tens of millions of dollars. Indirectly, it's probably saved even more than that. I sat on the board for 10 years. It was the closest I got to being in your seat. I was Alan's boss. We made decisions. That board is predominantly made up. I don't know if it still is, but back in those days, it was predominantly mayors or elected officials from local communities around the state of Montana, a group of city managers around the state of Montana, and a group of clerks, city clerks around the state of Montana. And I always felt that the group genuinely was trying to wear the hat of a local government entity and its services that it provides and its decisions it makes. And it's had some tough, we've had some tough issues over the years, but I have no question that we have benefited by not simply being with Hartford or some, global conglomerate insurance company, and it's been to our benefit. So as we try to find more opportunities to have Alan and Dan and others around the state come in and do training and education, we would appreciate feedback from you guys, honestly, after this as to whether you felt this was a good use of your time, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to continue to improve what we do in educating you so that you can make better decisions and we can make better decisions as well. So thanks to both of you for taking the time to come to Billings. So
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. Well, Council, our next item up on our agenda is discussion, before we go to public comment, on non-agenda items. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Shaw. We do have an opportunity for public comment. If Dan would like to contradict anything that Alan said, this is your opportunity, or to ask questions. Okay. And seeing nobody else. Okay, seeing nobody else in the audience, we'll close the public comment period. The next item up is council discussion. This is an item that is on every work session agenda because it's embedded in our, I don't know if it's in the charter or the ordinance. Either way, it needs to be clarified as to exactly what this is, but we use it as an opportunity for more general questions for staff, heads up. Because it's not specific, we can't really get into the details too much because we would be running contrary to our open meeting laws without substantive notice. But are there items of council discussion? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess to Chris and the staff, watching the news, it's pretty scary what's happening on the East Coast. They're actually shutting down airlines and stuff, not because the staffs are at risk. I just want to make sure that if and when this does hit us, which I hope it doesn't, that the city is prepared for us. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen.
And would I be right to assume we're talking about the pandemic and we're talking about the latest strains and whether we actually run into workforce situations where we can't supply services? So be happy. I'm glad to say so far we're not in that. We've certainly been strained, but not at a level that you're seeing, and we'll at our tactical meeting tomorrow morning, now that everybody's back from these last few weeks and all that's happened. That'll certainly be a topic of our discussion, and I can report back to you guys in the weekly or next Monday night as to kind of what we're seeing relative. But the good news is so far it hasn't, crippled us any different, candidly. I don't want to break that, than it has over the past 18 months. Thank you.
Chris, if I can follow up on that, what's our supply of home test kits as a city for our employees? My family had a situation over the holidays where we were, one of our family members was a close contact, and boy, you can go through a lot of test kits because that close contact, and then the close contact may have close contacts, and it's very helpful to have those at $10 a pop if you can get them. So I'm hoping you're going to say that we have in the cellar hundreds of thousands of these, but I'm thinking maybe that's not your answer, but I'm hoping we have a good supply that we can make them available to our employees so that we can get them back to work maybe more quickly.
So be glad to report back on that. I'm not a good poker player. I myself, too, found myself in the first situation over the holidays, traveling and needing to engage in self-testing. And I think the whole country is generally a mess when it comes to this conversation. And so I'm certain there are not tens of thousands of test kits in the basement of City Hall. But we will certainly, that'll be one of the topics. And maybe I'll learn that we have a greater number than I would have speculated, but that will make that a part of that conversation as to what do we have and what has been the availability to the city, similar to the early days when we really struggled to even get PPE. So that can be a part of our report back to you guys as to where we are in that.
Okay, thank you. Anything else in the way of council discussion? Councilmember Purington?
Well, just one, with regard to some of the things that Dan was talking about with council priorities, that there's also staff priorities, and I know you've always had your priorities. Is there some way that we can kind of spell those out in a list? I know you've got a CIP and all of that, but those are things that, we're not all going to accomplish.
So there's not a secret list somewhere. It's the good or the bad news. We're glad to have that dialogue more open, more or less. It really comes down to what ultimately you guys want. My first attempt at this, and I know Dan's not here anymore, every year that I've done this conversation, it's been different in my career. And it would seem like this should be so straightforward and simple, but it never is. But I will tell you, we all have an impact on each other. The first year I got here, I was enthusiastic. I wanted to talk about more vision, and I wanted the staff to engage with priorities. Fair amount of pushback from elected officials that they are not the elected officials, and I don't want to know. I don't think they should be telling us what the priorities should be. That was never the intent. We even had a different colored dot so you could differentiate between a staff priority and an elected official. So I think it really opens up a deeper dialogue later. I debated, we didn't hand it out tonight. I really think we should have a discussion between the 24 of us about our expectations. Your expectations of the staff's expectations of you, your obligations as elected officials, and our obligations as department directors. And though I don't think it's a utopian exercise, I've got the form, it's empty on your side. Your directors have spent 2 opportunities in strategic discussions, kind of debating out what they think should be on their side. And I think that would be a fruitful discussion for us, helping to flush out some of these types of things. So there is a little more clarity. It's never going to be perfect clarity, but a little more clarity where we've got 25 people interacting with each other, all with generally the best interest in heart of moving this community forward.
And I would kind of like to see that, because I know in a couple of years we're coming up with sunsetting PD1 unless there's an election. And I think I don't want to wait until that year. I mean, we need to have, plan A and B, possibly C, moving forward. We've got some major infrastructure needs that are, I guess, we're going to address next week as well. So I think some of those things to know, because sometimes we don't know anything till it's here.
Correct.
So if there's things down the pipe that staff is working towards, then I think that would be good for us to know, so that whenever we do lay out some priorities, we're not completely mismatched with what they're wanting to do.
Absolutely. And the good news is I don't think we're very far off. I think our biggest surprise of recent history has been the $10 million radio communications miss, by staff and never on your radar. So between your adopted priorities, most recent, that planning one or parks is on there, and these dialogues, I think there really isn't something laying out there unknown. I'll hand out to you that expectations document just so you can take it with you. And we were going to talk about it Friday in orientation, but ultimately we're not going to get anywhere with it without it being a conversation between all of us. And I know that's not fully what you're asking, but I do think that will help set a little clarity about expectations and obligations from all of us who are working so hard to move this community forward.
Thank you. Other items of council discussion, Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to continue the discussion with the council priorities. I think this is the time, again, the discussion time is really to discuss it amongst ourselves, to find out what we'd like to do and see forward, and help Chris, formulate a plan for us to participate in. And so, Chris, your staff has already had 2 meetings with talking about some of your priorities and goals for the year. You've had some good retreat time. And maybe not a whole 2 weeks are spent on that, but what I'm saying is you've had that time. The council, typically what we've done is have a couple hours on a Saturday, and it's really kind of rush and short. What I would like to see, and I'm letting you council, asking you guys to think of this too, is I'd like to have some additional council meetings, and if we hold them on Saturdays for half an afternoon or a morning or a couple hours 2 or 3 times, so we can talk about some of these things, interact with the staff, so we can kind of learn their priorities, see if they fit within ours. We're not goal setting. This is really more of a mining session to discover what's out there. And then we can come back and have some more discussions and really set our priorities. But I think when we go ahead and do it in a quick time, I think it shortchanges the whole city. And so I'd like to hear other council members and what they think or how a planning session could look like, and maybe help Chris. You've kind of heard what I think, and maybe give Chris some ideas on that. So.
Okay. On that topic or others, Councilmember Ripsis.
Well, thank you. My plan was actually to not speak tonight, but this actually was the one thing I was thinking that I would like to discuss. And Councilmember Neese, I totally agree. I think, and Puritan, we need to have this conversation about priorities. I think as we do this, we should look at it as a 2-year set of priorities, though. Council adopted a priority list last year, but frankly, I'm not sure anybody was really happy with how that went last year. I didn't see a lot of people just super excited about that. So here, I think we've got 4 out of the council that are brand new and bringing a lot of ideas, and I know everybody else has a lot of ideas as well. I'd like to see us go about some type of priority planning session, as Councilmember Neese suggested, and take it with a 2-year mindset of these are the things that we need to accomplish before the next set of elections. So.
And for what it's worth, I agree there's no need to rush the process, and if by stretching it out, it results in a better product, I think that's just fine. It feels good to get it done at the beginning, but just feels good. So if it takes a little bit longer, unless there's something truly time critical, I don't know that we need to be under artificial time deadlines. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. That's very good. The comments are very good. Having gone through strategic planning, priority setting before, I'll refer back to Mr. Clark's comment that our budget is our priority list. And so the process is very good. I mean, it's a very important exercise, and it's something that we need to do. We will then, I think at one point when we took priorities that council had put together, the time we used iPads, I think we had over 200 things on our list to prioritize. And I think that's one we're not going to go back to. I hope we don't go back to that one. That was just awful, because a list of 200 priorities and then trying to figure out what's number one of 200. It was really just a very difficult process to try to do that. So, and we've tried 2 or 3 different models. So hopefully we can arrive at a model that actually works for us, because there are 11 of us, but I think it was about 200 things to try and prioritize. So, and when you add that component at a later date or at some point, if you want to talk about the resources you have to commit to those priorities, then the discussion gets real. And that's how you get down to 1 or 2. So I look forward to whatever model we're going to move forward with. It's a lot of fun, and I don't mind the dots. And different colored dots are good with me too, so thank you.
Okay, council, I think we should wrap up. I will do it with just a final reminder that staff has advertised for new board openings, and the deadline for those applications is January 15th. If anybody wants a list of those, if you haven't seen that, I'd be more than happy to email you a copy. Of significance is that the Citizens Police Advisory Board is on that list. And we've got about 7 applications. I think we want to have a lot more than that. We want people with certain relevant skills, which could be broadly defined. But please, if you know people who are good, might be good, encourage them to get in their applications so we have as many people to choose from as possible. Council? It's the regular application for any board, but for that one, there is a statement from our resolution describing the requirement for expertise, and I forget how that's described. So they should try to focus on that. People, of course, are welcome to add multiple pages if they want to that.
Could you send that out again? I think I've seen it.
Yeah, I will do that so that everybody has that and can focus on that. And of course, there are other boards as well. With that, we still have public comment on non-agenda items. So if, Dan, you know how this works. If you've got anything you want to say that wasn't on our agenda, this is your opportunity. Speak now or forever hold your peace. We'll give you 3 minutes. We want to know where you're from, and even if you're not from Billings, that's okay. We'll listen to you politely. Nobody's coming forward for some reason, so we'll close the public comment period. New council members, you survived your first meeting. Congratulations. All right. We are adjourned.